salt. It's a simple substance, as ordinary as it is plentiful. But it's an invaluable resource with more than 14,000 uses. From de-icing our roads to softening our water. It's within each and every one of us, an indispensable part of our biological chemistry. And it stands alone as the only rock that we eat. There's a tremendous amount of salt in the earth, especially in the United States. Eons in the past, North America was covered by prehistoric seas. 150 million years ago, when the seas evaporated, they left vast beds of salt, salt that was eventually covered by layers of sediment. Part of the enormous deposit lies 1,800 feet directly beneath Lake Erie. Workers at Cargill De-icing Technologies salt mine in Cleveland, Ohio, are busy tapping it.
The salt that we're mining today is 400 million years old, and our mine itself is out underneath the lake. How do you keep the lake out of the mine? We've got 1,200 foot of limestone that protects the mine from the lake bottom. We actually go out 3 miles offshore, and we extend across the face of the city of Cleveland almost 6 miles.
The Cleveland mine, like all modern salt mines, thunders with a constant barrage of precision explosives, blasting of tons of salt each year. Nearly half of the salt produced in the United States is quarried in this way. The workers who make it all happen begin by taking a ride from the surface to the vast subterranean chamber below.
The service cage is used for transporting personnel and supplies into the mine. We're going down 1,800 feet, dropping at 500 feet a minute, and it will take us approximately 3.5 minutes to get to the bottom.
The subterranean world at the bottom of the shaft takes 25 minutes to traverse. A network of tunnels links chambers excavated in the last half-century. Pillars of pure salt support the roof of each cavernous room.
Behind me, you see the room and pillar method that we utilize here. This pillar's 30 feet wide, 20 feet thick, and 20 feet tall. It's solid salt that we leave behind to help support the ground conditions here in the mine. Helps create a safe work environment for the employees.
The sturdy pillars prevent everything up there from collapsing down here, enabling workers to go about the business of extracting 10,000 tons of salt from the mine every day. A crewman operating a machine called a scaler starts the process. He preps a chamber for the blasting team by scraping away loose chunks of salt from the roof and walls. Next, a rig called a bolter inserts metal rods into the chamber roof at strategic spots. This compresses the rock, helping the ceiling to remain intact as the face of the wall is detonated. The bolter installs 10 rods, each capable of anchoring about 25,000 pounds.
This is a 6-foot bolt, 3/4 inch wrought iron. Once the drill's hold, we take resin, basically for anchoring the bolt, stick the resin in the hole, put a 6x6 plate on top of the bolt.
After the bolter finishes prepping the roof, a machine called a smag operator starts prepping the wall to be blasted.
A smag operator is a machine that has 3 11-inch auger drills that are carbide tipped. They drill approximately 24 feet deep.
The machine drills 6 holes in all. They'll remain empty to leave room for the exploding salt to expand. Next, workers drill dozens of additional holes, just as deep, but only 2 inches wide. These will house the explosive charges.
We're drilling 50 holes per phase, and we have to drill in a certain pattern. Basically, we're 4.5 feet from each hole.
Next, the powder crew takes over. loading each of the 50 holes with ammonium nitrate, or AM foam.
We have the AM foam put in a pot. We have 50 caps and 50 boosters. Put your booster on your cap first, and then once you put the caps in, you put your ANFO in, which is in a hose. Basically, you're packing the ANFO into the hole to make sure it's tight. So when it detonates, it's a tight explosion and it blows out every piece of salt.
The center of this room, which we refer to as the burn, will shoot first, and then the rest of the room will shoot towards the center on a delayed basis. When it is completed, we'll have anywhere from 800 to 1,000 tons on the ground. Once the fuse is tied on, the shot crew will come down, light the fuse, and they'll leave the unit.
16 hours of demanding work now boils down to one critical instant. After the dust clears, it's showtime for this mechanical brute, an elphinstone loader, or mucker. Scoop by scoop, it begins the grunt work of moving dislodged salt from the mine.
I pull in there and I pick up a bucket load of salt, which is an average of 20 tons per bucket, and then I'll take and I'll haul it around to our crusher. We call it a stammler, but it crushes up the salt into smaller pieces, and then I'll come around and I'll get another load, and I'll just keep repeating this until I empty this whole section out.
The elphinstone loader and all the heavy machinery here was lowered into the mine in pieces and then reassembled. None of the multi-million-dollar rigs will ever emerge from the mine.
Once a vehicle is taken out of service, we have what we call a boneyard. We take the old equipment out there and we'll scavenge any parts off it that we can use on other pieces of equipment. Otherwise, it's stored out there forever.
A date with the boneyard is still years away for the stammler, or feeder breaker, that crushes the salt from the recent blast site into softball-sized chunks. It keeps the mining process moving by dumping the salt onto a conveyor that leads to a subterranean mill.
It runs approximately 18 hours a day, 750 tons an hour. From here, it goes up to our main crushers. It's crushed, goes through the screen plant, gets screened to product size.
Now, the screen salt has to make a prodigious 1,800-foot ascent to the surface. That journey comes courtesy of this brawny production elevator, or skip.
Basically, it's a load bucket. It carries 20 tons of salt. When this one is up dumping, the second one is down on the bottom loading. And every couple minutes, they change places to bring up the salt every day.
Each skip weighs about 50,000 pounds empty. They hang from 4 ropes that go from the top of one skip up and over the hoist drum and back down to the other skip. The total combined weight hanging on the drum is over 100,000 pounds.
This ongoing parade of salt is propelled by twin electric motors, producing 3,000 horsepower. The skip runs 2 shifts per day, hauling up 20 tons of salt every 2 minutes.
You can see door opens and unloads that 20 tons of salt in just a matter of seconds.
And it carries a price tag of $250,000.
This is our cash cow. Nothing in mining is cheap, and this is no exception, but we expect this to last us another 14, 15 years.
From here, the salt hitches a ride on a conveyor to a central holding facility.
The conveyor belt comes up here to the 5th floor bin house, where this system known as a tripper distributes that salt to the 36 bins you see here. The control of this tripper is from the control room you see up above. The operator up there has a choice to move the tripper left and right and forward and backward in order to dump it into any one of these bins.
Next, the salt rides conveyors to a variety of loading docks. Workers will load 1 million tons into trucks, another million into boats, and another 500,000 tons will leave by train. Rail cars awaiting their allotment line up in strings of 10.
And for a car like this, there's 25, 30 batches to make up the car. So we just you know, boom, boom, and that's what you'll see, boom, 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 boom. Every time you see a splash of salt, it's about 5,000 pounds of salt. These cars service primarily the middle parts of the Midwest states, Ohio, Indiana, northern Kentucky to some extent, and all the way over to Baltimore.
A lot of this salt will end up as a de-icing agent on the snowy roads of the Midwest. 60 to 70,000 tons alone will stay local, sprinkled across the streets of Cleveland. Over the centuries, we've discovered countless ways to use salt, but not all of it has been extracted from deep within the earth. Our treasure of salt awaits harvesting just a few tantalizing inches below the sea. Salt, the general of foods, as one ancient writer described it, is usually thought of as something we sprinkle on meals. But salt is much more than that. Just 4% of the 50 million tons of salt produced in the U.S. each year is eaten. The chemical properties of salt help prevent our household pipes from clogging by changing hard water to soft water.
One of the industrial uses that we often don't appreciate is ion exchange water softening, where we take hardness chemicals, calcium and magnesium, out of the water. And by exchanging the sodium ion for the calcium and magnesium ions, you make a softened water, which sudses, which is much more useful and consumer friendly, so you have some shine in your hair after you take a shampoo.
Most of the salt in the world is consumed by the chemical industry. Processing plants split salt into its component elements, sodium and chloride, which are used to make everything from plastics to detergent to poison gas. Historians believe humans first discovered salt's value when primitive tribes followed animal herds to natural salt licks. As civilizations developed, cultures learned that they could produce salt by boiling sea or spring water until only the salt remained. The ancient Romans exemplified the degree to which humanity valued this simple mineral. They named one of their most important imperial roads the Via Salaria, or Salt Road. Their appreciation of salt was also reflected in their language.
If you look at the word salary, you can see right there the root word. It comes from the word sal, salt. And Roman soldiers were often paid a portion of their salary in salt if they were out in battle, because they had to have salt. And so everywhere you look in human history, you see salt having that sort of value.
Salt mined from the Sahara's ancient dry seabeds powered a lucrative trade in Africa. Merchants exchanged it for gold offered by salt-hungry cultures south of the desert. This silent trade, as it was called, still continues in Ethiopia. In 1930, Mohandas Gandhi used salt to rally the Indian people during his struggle to free them from British colonial rule. He staged a 240-mile march to the sea to protest Britain's salt tax, as well as its law banning Indians from producing salt.
He and people with him marched out into the sea, and he came back out of the sea and picked up a fistful of salt. And people all over India, Indians, started picking up salt, and it was chaos. And thousands of people went to jail, and they went to jail for touching the salt.
Today, our relationship with salt remains as strong as ever. We need it physiologically, a minimum of 3 grams a day, 3 pounds a year.
Salt is necessary because both the sodium and the chloride have essential functions. The sodium, for example, is engaged in transporting electrical impulses from inside the cell to outside the cell. Our bodies are really electrical machines, and salt is what makes that happen.
Since our very lives depend on this simple substance, it's not surprising that we've devised a number of ways to procure it. Solution mining dates back to the 19th century. Workers begin the process by drilling a pipe into a subterranean deposit. They shoot water down the pipe, creating an underground pool of salt-intense brine. Then pumps force the brine up a second pipe, and boilers heat it until nothing but pure salt remains.
That salt is used for food grade, water softening pellets, animal feed, other types of chemical processing and manufacturing. Another method is through solar evaporation by bringing in seawater or salty brine water, allowing it to collect in ponds in the sun and let the sun and wind evaporate the water off.
They call it salt farming. And Cargill's 1,000 acres of salt farms in the San Francisco Bay Area demonstrate that it's a method as colorful as it is effective.
Well, watching salt being produced is magical, and salt in beautiful colors, especially red salt. It's just so gorgeous to be in that environment.
Lots of sunshine and steady winds combine with the bay's salty water to produce 600,000 tons of salt per year.
Our harvest is in the fall. Like a normal food crop, we grow the salt during the summer months. What we have here, this is the salt, the wash salt going onto our stack. The new crop is in front, and last year's crop, which we're reclaiming, is behind it.
The farming process begins when highly concentrated salt water, or brine, is pumped into 70-acre crystallization ponds like this one. Next, just add time. Lots of it.
What I have in my hand here are a number of crystals of salt that have grown together. 5 years ago, they were sodium and chloride ions floating around out in San Francisco Bay. And we pump the bay water into our system, into our concentrators. And we pump it around for 5 years until it's concentrated enough to grow a crop of salt. It looks like it's going to be a good harvest this year. The crystals are large, and that's a sign of a good crop.
The Bay Area is ideal for salt production because of all these strong winds that comes usually after noon. And this will help evaporation a lot and will mix all your components of your brine and increase the salt crystallization.
Salt-loving bacteria also accelerate the evaporation process. These plentiful bacteria, along with millions of tiny single-celled plants, also infuse the brine with its signature color.
Color of the brine is given by different organisms. Usually we have the red, the orange, and the pink, and that will be dependent on what kind of either bacteria or blue-green algae.
Biologists constantly monitor the salinity of the brine, which must remain within a narrow spectrum to produce the highest quality salt. Left unchecked, the microorganisms can make the brine too salty, and an overabundance of rain can dilute the brine. When the crop is mature, the exposed salt bed is 5 to 7 inches thick. After a grader breaks up the salt, a mechanical harvester with a snowplow-like blade scoops up the pieces. Once on the harvester, conveyors transfer the salt to cargo trucks. They'll finish gathering the crop in 3 months, just in time to beat the winter rains.
You can see it's kind of a dance. They have to go along at almost the same speed as the harvester. The truck's being loaded at about 1,500 tons an hour. It'll take a little over a minute to load that 30-ton truck. From here, the truck drives about a mile to our washer, and it turns from that brownish color to a pure white. This is our salt washer. The salt comes in at about 95% purity. When it's done washing, what we see here is near the exit. It's about 99% sodium chloride. From here, it gets sprayed again with a clean freshwater rinse. And over here, the salt is exiting our screens and going on the conveyor belts onto our big salt stack on the right. This mound is what we've harvested in the last week, and it's the cleanest solar salt in the world. And I love looking at that pile. I could look at that pile for hours.
Salt's glistening purity is showcased magnificently in this illustrious setting. The strange subterranean world of Wieliczka, Poland. This illustrious chapel one of the oldest and most beautiful in Poland, is packed with precious relics, carvings, and works of art. But there's something strange here. Something that makes this chapel different. The Blessed Kinga Chapel lies 300 feet underground, carved in the depths of a medieval salt mine. Everything in it, the walls, floor, chandeliers, altar, and works of art, was crafted by miners from pure salt.
Visitors can see many reliefs, beautiful reliefs and figures. Miners only made the decoration of the chapel. There was one miner working at the time, of course. When one had finished, another started to work, then another one. But it took them 67 years to make all the figures, reliefs we have in the chapel.
The Royal Wieleczka Salt Mines in Poland is one of the most extraordinary places anyone could ever visit. Miles and miles of salt mines, gorgeous black salt, and the city of Wieleczka is on top of the mines.
The Wieleczka salt mine dates back to the Middle Ages and plunges as deep as 1,100 feet below the Earth's surface. 125 miles of tunnels link 2,040 individual chambers. Over the past 700 years, miners have extracted more than 50 million tons of rock salt. Since the 17th century, tourists have flocked to this mesmerizing underworld to view its subterranean pools, intricate networks of structural supports, and remarkable salt art. The United Nations has placed this humble salt mine on its World Heritage List as one of the cultural treasures of mankind.
You can almost see thousands of miners working here, ages of our history, and it is very important, I think, not only for the Polish people, but for people from all over the world.
The salt deposits beneath Wieleczka are residue from a Miocene-era primordial sea that evaporated 20 million years ago. In the 13th century AD, villagers began digging into and mining the salt bed. The story of how the Wieleczka mine developed from there is shrouded in legend.
It is a legend about the Princess Kinga, princess from Hungary. She married the Polish prince and she decided to give us a present. She took her engagement ring, she threw it to the salt mine in Hungary. It was a sign that she took that mine in possession. And when she came to Poland, she ordered Polish miners to start digging in our town. They found salt, and in the first block of salt, they found her ring. The salt was traveling underground, following Kinga to her husband's country. That's the legend.
In the Middle Ages, working conditions in salt mines were extremely harsh, especially for the first Wieleczka miners.
During Middle Ages, Europe was the place of almost mutual permanent wars. During these wars, it was easy to get slaves. And these slaves were put to the industry. And what was the industry in this time? In this time, the main industry was agriculture and mining operations at Wieleczka. So they put the slaves to Wieleczka mine and ordered them to work as much as possible, probably to death.
In the 14th century, free miners began working in Wieleczka, but they didn't have it much easier. Using tools of wood and iron, it took a team of 3 miners a full month to tunnel 9 feet. Many miners spent their entire lives clearing salt from the same chamber. As the mine deepened, engineers faced the growing challenge of transporting workers to the bottom and salt to the surface.
Here you can see the machine which was used to transport the miners, the horses and the salt from the 18th century, before the age of elevators. Look how big it is. It is also very old and very well preserved. It is because of the salt.
It's the first system of elevator in the salt mine, operated by 8 horses, which pulled around this capstan in both directions. This capstan was connected with shaft by very thick ropes.
The ropes wound around massive wooden pulleys, which could lift salt blocks weighing 2 tons from the mine.
It was so many years ago, it's still amazing how clever were those people using such tools made mainly of wood.
Like all salt mines in the Middle Ages, Wieliczka was fraught with danger. The greatest hazard was explosive methane gas, released during the mining process. It would accumulate in crevices near the ceilings. The miners most at risk were the so-called penitents, who used long torches to burn off the pockets of gas. They earned the nickname because of the way they stretched out on remote ledges, as if appealing to God. Wieliczka's dangers compelled miners to fashion the religious icons, figures, and chapels that adorn the mine. In 1689, workers began seeking the divine protection of the mine's patron saint in daily services. The Blessed Kinga Chapel is the largest of 3. It stretches 180 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 50 feet high. It endures as a unique religious and artistic masterpiece.
The floor is really beautiful. It looks like marble, but it is salt, polished by our visitors. And not only the floor is made out of salt, but also walls, all the figures and all reliefs. Chandeliers in the Blessed Kinga Chapel are decorated with the crystal salt from our mine. We have 2 chambers full of very big crystals, very symmetrical. And so the miners decided to decorate the chandeliers with them. And the crystals in the chandelier are translucent, so they illuminate very beautifully.
Beauty of a different sort at Wieliczka lurks in chambers off limits to tourists. Salt marvels, crafted not by man, but by nature. The world, nature crafts salt like an artist molds clay. Southern California's Mono Lake features salt towers known as tufas. Some reach as high as 30 feet and date back 900 years. On Bolivia's Altiplano, the plateau where the Andes are at their widest, lies the Uyuni Salt Flat, the largest salt bed in the world. The salt layer penetrates down more than 30 feet and weighs a staggering 64 billion tons. And some of salt's most intriguing natural formations lurk in Poland's Wieliczka salt mine, at the end of obscure passageways off limits to tourists.
We would like to show other parts of the mine to the public, but it is dangerous. We have carbon monoxide, methane in this mine. Some corridors are very slow and they are going to collapse in the future. So unfortunately, the real mine is closed for the visitors.
The real mine is an untamed and captivating environment, highlighting the surprisingly varied forms of salt. Strangely wavy chambers like this one were once filled from top to bottom with water. The water was siphoned out and crystallized into salt, leaving a desolate moonscape. This barely upright cavern, accessible only through a hole in a wall, looks like a trash heap. But light converts a salt-soaked piece of wood into a raft of gleaming jewels. In addition to the many unexpected sights at Wieliczka, there are also unexpected sounds.
Sometimes our visitors are really surprised when they are in a corridor and suddenly they hear music. The band is very old, and we have almost only miners and retired miners in our band. But acoustics in the Weimar chamber is wonderful, so they usually play here on the 2nd level.
The Wieliczka Salt Mine Band was formed in 1830. It's been entertaining visitors here for nearly 2 centuries. It harkens back to the mine's golden age of tourism. Kings and commoners once flocked to the salt works to dance in enormous ballrooms and dine in banquet halls carved from pure salt. Royal guests could tour the mine on a subterranean railway in velvet-upholstered cars. Visitors could also explore the wonders of Wieliczka by boat, rowing through brine grottos and lakes like this one, along a system of canals. Officials banned boating less than a century ago, when 3 Swiss revelers capsized and drowned, unable to escape from under their canoe in the heavy brine. Not everyone who ventured within the Wieliczka mine came willingly. Toward the end of the Second World War, the Nazis herded Jewish captives here. The Germans' plan was to convert this towering chamber into an airplane parts factory, in which the Jews would labor. The war ended before production began, but not before the Nazis led some 2,000 Jews out of the mine and on a death march to concentration camps in Czechoslovakia. A Star of David, etched by miners after the war, memorializes those captives. Today, this unique underworld, so rich with history, threatens to become history itself. All 9 levels of the mine are held in place by pillars and logs, which are fighting a losing battle against the immense weight of the earth.
Some of them are broken like as a match. What destroyed this very thick woods so easily? It's the pressure of earth. The more cavities we create and support, the more logs of wood are broken.
Relentless water seepage and crumbling supports also imperil the mine. A flood in 1992 swamped its 4th level, 566 feet underground, which is still inaccessible. Above, in the village of Wieliczka, periodic sinkholes remind residents that they live on very shaky ground.
7 years ago, a part of our railway tracks subsided because of the flood in the mine, and we don't have a railway station in the center of the town anymore. A train cannot get there. Almost everyone living in Wieliczka has a chamber or a corridor under his house. So we can all wake up in the mine one day.
Beyond the threats to the mine's structural integrity are those to its unique collection of art. Humidity, especially near the windy shafts, has eroded some of Wieliczka's salt sculptures, which are simply melting away. Ironically, while the mine itself is ailing, it's providing a cure for respiratory patients from around Europe who come here to take in the salty air. Of all the sites in Wieliczka, this might be the strangest. An 80-bed sanatorium on the 5th level, 650 feet underground.
We have many people suffering from asthma, bronchitis, and allergies, resting and breathing. It is very healthy for them to spend some time underground in the salt mine, because the air in the salt mine is very clean, almost free of bacteria and completely free of fungi.
Wieliczka isn't the only salt mine with a few surprises. During World War II, the Nazis converted one salt mine into their own version of Fort Knox. Although we may think of salt as a kind of food, over the centuries it's played a more important role as a food preservative. Before refrigeration, people packed fish, meat, and other perishables in salt as a safeguard against famine. In the 20th century, as we sought to preserve goods beyond food, we found an ideal solution in the mines where salt originated.
The temperature is very even in a salt mine, and the humidity is very even, which is very important.
645 feet beneath the Kansas prairie, a salt mine doubles as an enormous warehouse. 28 acres of storage space are entombed in a salt deposit 100 miles long, 40 miles wide, and 325 feet thick. Clients store everything here, from 19th century newspapers to tax records and secret government documents. One of the facility's greatest treasures comes from Hollywood. Reel after reel of original film negatives, from The Wizard of Oz to Star Wars. Among the first to exploit salt mines as long-term warehouses were the Nazis. Near the end of World War II, the Allies discovered they had been using mines throughout the Third Reich to store the plunder of conquest. The Nazis stashed their greatest treasures in a salt mine in the village of Merkers, southwest of Berlin. 1,200 feet underground, the maze of tunnels and chambers made for an exceptional hiding place. In March 1945, American troops advancing through Merkers discovered the hideaway, but only because of a chance encounter with the locals.
There were two ladies walking along the road, and some MPs gave them a ride, and they said, "Oh, well, have you found the mine with the gold yet?" And so that was the first word they had. And then after a little while, some soldiers turned up with helmets full of gold coins.
After dynamiting their way into shaft number 3 of the Merkers mine, the Americans were stunned by what they found. The entire gold reserve of the Third Reich. 100 tons of gold bullion, countless sacks of gold coins, and bales of international currency, including 2 million American dollars, 100 million French francs, and 3 billion German marks. An Austrian salt mine in the tiny village of Alt-Aussee served as a hideout for a different kind of Nazi treasure. Adolf Hitler's personal collection of paintings and other works of art. The Germans had systematically pilfered most of them from the European nations they'd conquered.
The people who'd gone to check it out in the first place had found a little chapel there, and in the chapel were a bunch of oil paintings which had been hanging there since 1933, and this was 1945, and they were in just perfect condition, so they realized that this was a very good place to store works of art.
Warehoused in the salt mine were such masterworks as Vermeer's self-portrait in the studio, the Ghent altarpiece by Van Eyck, and the Bruges Madonna by Michelangelo. The Nazis had stolen the Madonna from Brussels in a nighttime raid and transported it across Europe wrapped in a mattress. The sculpture was still in the mattress when American soldiers found it in Alt-Aussee. But it wasn't the only treasure stored there in a way that belied its pricelessness.
The Ghent altarpiece was taken apart in separate panels and sort of sitting on a little wooden scaffolding. But for the officers going into this Aladdin's cave, it was just a remarkable and very emotional experience, because these were things they'd studied all their lives, and here they were in this very peculiar situation.
Make that a precarious situation. The precious works of art were nearly destroyed in the last days of the war. Just days before the Allies arrived, Nazi soldiers placed 100-pound bombs throughout the mine. But German miners and curators saved the day, detonating smaller decoy bombs to deceive the SS. Later, demolition experts removed the real bombs.
It seemed to take forever to get them out of these long, long tunnels, and they put them in a big heap outside of the mine. It's quite an amusing picture of them later on, all sitting on these bombs. But they did save both the mine and the incredible treasures that were inside.
In the many decades since World War II, salt mines have continued to prove invaluable as mass storage facilities. Energy providers use them as gargantuan fuel tanks.
For example, we have our strategic petroleum reserve in salt caverns. Many areas have excavated caverns for the storage of natural gas, which is put under pressure in those.
Deep below the New Mexico desert, a salt mine functions as America's solution to one of its most critical storage problems. Since 1999, Department of Energy transport trucks have been delivering containers of nuclear waste to this waste dump, known as WIPP.
WIP stands for the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. It was a facility constructed to safely dispose of plutonium-contaminated nuclear waste.
Workers lower the waste more than 2,100 feet to the base of the mine, where it will remain toxic for the next 250,000 years. 9 miles of tunnels link disposal rooms 13 feet high, 33 feet wide, and 300 feet long.
Salt is particularly attractive because it tends to act like a plastic, so it creeps over geologic time, thousands of years. And if there's a fracture or opening, like the rooms we would put waste in at WIP, the salt would close in and basically recrystallize around the waste.
This natural process, which takes eons to occur, will safely seal the nuclear waste in a permanent hard cocoon. Still, WIP officials acknowledge the danger to distant generations who might discover the lethal deposits. The Department of Energy faces an unprecedented dilemma: how to send a warning to people who won't be born for hundreds of thousands of years.
We're not going to walk away from that facility when we're done filling it up saying, well, I hope everyone just stays away. There will be a sophisticated system of records and archives throughout the country, as well as markers on site that we will do our best in as many languages as we think makes sense to warn people about the hazards of what lies underneath.
Thus far, proposed warning markers for the toxic salt mine include a field of spikes, a sequence of grimacing masks, and a landscape of thorns. If salt does prove to be a reliable repository for nuclear waste, it'll be a fitting new role for a mineral that humans have come to depend on in so many ways. Salt, the ultimate preservative, has safeguarded our health, our food, our gold, and now, quite possibly, our future. A future in which innovators promise to conceive new uses for this humble and versatile mineral, and for the spectacular mines from which it comes.